Anyway, we are here, and I have no clue where we left off. We did nothing in the month of December, and so it's been a while, and then I broke my wrist, so I kind of fell behind on my work, but I'm pretty much all caught up now, at least till the next thing I fall behind on is. Anyway, we've been talking about I don't know if we started talking about the taking of the promised land, but that's where we're going to be. So we're going to be moving out of the Pentateuch into the Torah, out of the Torah and Pentateuch and into the book of Judges, and of course, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, for this next little bit. Now, this is a little bit interesting because we see that this starts with Joshua chapter 1, verses 2 through 5, where he says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore rise, go over to this Jordan, and all of you, and you and all this people, into the land that I'm giving you to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you, just as I have promised to Moses, from the wilderness of the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, towards the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man should be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. So there's basically three geographical and chronological phases as outlined at the end of the Pentateuch and the beginning of the book and into the book of Joshua, what happens. The first of those, happens in Numbers chapter 20 through 22, where we see the battle of the Transjordan. The Bible gives a very long description about that, for as long as descriptions go. We see the crossing of the Jordan River, and of course the conquest to northern Canaan. Now, these are very prevalent areas. These have taken a long time. There's a lot of description about this. So early archaeologists believed that there's essentially when they started digging, there's going to be a very easily discoverable trail, right? I mean, this is pretty much true everywhere. In fact, I noticed that when I was in grad school, there was a guy who was always there with a metal detector. We lived on this historic grounds, and in fact, our building was this really old mansion that dated to the early 20th century, and it was gorgeous. I absolutely loved it. I'm sad that I had to sell it. But anyway, I asked him one day what he was doing, and he's like, oh, I'm digging for Civil War relics. And I'm like, what? And he goes, well, this used to be an encampment of a Civil War. He didn't say battle, he said encampment, so I don't think any famous battle took place there. And I go, oh, I mean, how do you know that? And he goes, well, it's well documented. And I go, have you ever found anything? He goes, like, yeah. And he showed me something that he found today. It looked like an old canteen. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. So when you know where something is and you have the details, and there should be evidence of this. Well, obviously, this is probably a lot easier to do with the Civil War, because the Civil War only happened 175 years ago, about 175 years ago, give or take. And of course, it gets much harder the more time that goes on. So what did they find? Well, the Bible's going to give some examples. And the first one we've already talked a lot about. In fact, I use this as my jumping off point for when I first started the class when talking about Jericho. I kind of showed you what Jericho was, and I kind of talked about the big thing being trying to date Jericho and put it to a burn layer test, because we know the city of Jericho was set on fire during the time of Joshua, according to the Bible's claim, but we cannot chronologically accurately date a burn layer attributed to any time in that time frame. I mean, you really even have to finagle it to get one close. They did find a burn layer, but it's so far outside the time frame that, I mean, most people dismiss it as being the actual time frame of the time that the city actually burned. And so that possibly means that we somehow miss the burn layer of Jericho, but Jericho is, out of, I think, almost every city in ancient Israel, is probably one of the most heavily excavated cities. I don't know if digs still go on today, but they've got a very thorough one. You can go, I think you can even go for free. And if you ever get a chance, just go to Jericho. It's really neat. But like I said, it doesn't fit the Exodus timeline. It doesn't fit the evidence of destruction of Israelites as we know, as far as our technology allows us to be. And that means our technology could be off. That's always a possibility. Carbon dating is not an exact science. But they don't just use carbon dating for these things. They're looking at other things such as pottery, tools, instruments, other things that are associated with the burn layer that might align it more. And none of that is really lining up. There are a few more other cities that we've excavated. By we, and when I say we, I'm of course not talking about me. I've never done any of this. And that is the city of Debir, also found in Joshua chapter 10, and Bedem, found in Joshua chapter 7 and the 8. We see that both had signs of destruction in the 13th century. This would put it at a roughly 1200 BC. Now that actually is kind of good for the claim, but again, it doesn't really fit the timeline for Joshua. It's a lot better than trying to finagle that burn layer found in Jericho. But it's still, once they started to dig in these places, they started to really rethink the Exodus as a whole. In fact, William F. Albright, he is one of the most pioneered archaeologists in doing biblical archaeology. I think he's an evangelical, or he was an evangelical. I think he's dead at this point. So it's not like it's an atheist doing this work. Had to kind of draw some conclusions. And so these are some of the things that he had concerns about in his study and the work in the archaeology that he had done at the time. He found that no evidence existed to describe the destructions unequivocally. That's the key word here, is unequivocally. He's leaving room open for interpretation to the Israelites. A more skeptical reading of the Bible led him to question the early Israelites' ability to take on city-states of Canaan and defeat them so easily and so quickly. Actually, I think this is a rather interesting claim, and I don't remember if I cover that here in a second. So we'll talk more about this one in case I do, but I'm going to come back to this either way. Number 3, if Egypt controlled Canaan during the late Bronze Age and had garrisons there, why is there no reference to Joshua or the conquest in Egyptian writings? Which is true. I mean, if you had, normally it's just like you don't really report when you lose, but it's not so much that they lost here. It's just like you would have seen this as, oh, well, there's this guy raiding the countryside. His name was this. He was an Israelite. We don't even see anything like that. Another problem that he had is if a new people were to enter the land, decimate the population, destroy its infrastructure, and then occupy the land, the expectation would be that there should be more evidence of this new people in the form of a material culture, where we see kind of more of a, even the Bible kind of supports this claim, a blended culture.
I thought God told them not to destroy the infrastructure.
Yeah, well, he's just making a general point. And finally, I don't know what he's arguing here. Because I don't have the whole context of what he's saying. I found this as just a general list of his problems. But I think what he's saying here is that people are making assumptions. In fact, that's what a lot of what this is going on here is, that there is a lot of assumptions about what was said to be happened, and the evidence just really isn't backing up those assumptions. And so that's why this second one is probably the most important one, is he's like, well, I want to take a more skeptical reading of what Scripture is actually saying instead of just like what I think it's saying. That's one of the things I think Danny said this morning. We should be very critical in what the Bible is telling us and not what we think it's telling us. And so if they didn't offer a new culture, why destroy the land, infrastructure, or occupy the land and rebuild it? And so it probably is, that's also a very good question too.
What it brings to mind to me is God says, I'm going to give you a land that you didn't earn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you all of this thing that you didn't go in, you didn't cultivate, you didn't grow.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm giving this to you.
Yeah.
So when I read that, I mean it's already plush, it's already developed.
Well, it's like he calls it the what?
Land of the flow of milk and honey.
Milk and honey. And so it's already there for you. And so really you just have to take it. Now, there are some exceptions to that. And we see that one of the exceptions to that was obviously Jericho, Ai, and Hazor. All those were burned with fire. But we have this impression that there were a lot of cities burned in fire, but accordingly, this is the only thing that the Bible actually claims. So that right there in the back says, okay, well, maybe we're assuming these places are destroyed, but because we see examples of, okay, what does an army do? An army takes over, conquers, and destroys, but that's not necessarily what they're doing, at least not the third part. So he says, there are reasons the Bible claims, and of course we know that there are also reasons that the Bible claims were not conquered. And that falls into these areas covered here in Joshua 13. We also kind of look at this, in fact, this isn't just limited to the book of Joshua. I think this is a general statement on Scripture interpretation as we think of everything happening very quickly. How old is Joshua when this all starts? I mean, he probably wasn't that old, but we know by Joshua 13 he was old. And we know by Joshua 13 that there were still large areas of land to be taken. We don't really know how old Joshua was. We know that he is one of two people that were allowed to go into the land that were under 20, because he and Caleb were made exceptions for. But, I mean, this says he is old. And I'm sure that there's a date. There's almost always a date on when these people died, if you want to go and find them. But this claim right here is he's old, and previously he says, don't be afraid. Listen to your elders. So we can assume that large periods of time took place, not just weeks or months, in taking the land. So here's the land divided originally into not 12 tribes, but 11 tribes, and one of those tribes get two. So you have Simeon and Judah in the south. Eventually Judah will swallow up Simeon. And then you have the other tribes, Dan, Ephraim, Benjamin, Manasseh, Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali. Yeah, okay. I felt like I was missing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Who am I missing? There's someone missing up there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, I feel like someone's missing. So the land gets, either way, my slide might be wrong, gets broken into various pieces, and they're specifically getting those allotted portions, and we know that certainly they're not able to keep that. Dan especially is not able to keep that, because you can see Dan right here. Well, whose territory does Dan have right now? I can give you a hint. It's the C territory. And who are the C people? Who's going to be the big problem here coming up? What group of people are going to be the big problem?
The Israel people or
To the Israel people.
to the Israel people? Oh,
The Philistines. So they get actually driven north, and they'll end up established. So if you ever look at the city of Dan, it's way up north. It's not even located in the area of Dan's allotment. So I think they end up over in Naphtali or in Asher up there somewhere. I don't know exactly where, but it's in that general. I think it's north of the Sea of Galilee. So Joshua makes a what? Oh yeah, it's fine. So Josh, go ahead and your Bibles probably have these maps in them.
Oh, yeah. I got a bunch of this.
Yeah. So Joshua gathers all the tribes of Israel together at Shechem. Now Shechem's going to become a very, very important city here in a little bit because it's going to act as one of the, kind of like the capital of the north, I think. Yeah, I think it's the capital of the north. But it's also going to act as kind of a religious holy site. So he gathers the people together, all the tribes of Israel, to Shechem and summons the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel, and they present themselves before God. And Joshua makes a covenant with the people this day and puts in place statutes and rulers for them at Shechem. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and he took a large stone and set it up under the terebinth, whatever that is, that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. Okay, I remember where I was going at this. So, it's a tree? No, I didn't know that. Good to know.
that's where one of the 12 is sitting under or near. It's mentioned in one of the.
Oh, yeah.
Is it like a sycamore tree?
I don't know if it's a sycamore tree, but I have to go back and look. I have to look it up.
But there is at Shechem a religious pillar that they've discovered that you could see here. And it says all the leaders of Shechem came together and at Beth Milo, and they went up and made Abimelech king, technically the first king of Israel. We don't count him though. And by the oak of the pillar at Shechem. So this isn't even the first time it's referenced, but they believe that this is the pillar of Shechem that was discovered, originally placed there by Joshua after taking the land. So there is some archaeological evidence that Joshua did read it, and here's proof. Or that pillar can just be the strangest coincidence in all of human history. I don't know if I have Shechem on the map. Yeah. Yeah, it's in the northern kingdom, so it would be north. Yeah. Here, let me look it up really quick. How did I spell it? S-H. It's,
Yeah, Benjamin is missing, but
no, Benjamin is there.
I don't see it, which is why I moved closer.
Okay. So Shechem is north of Bethel and north of Jerusalem and Bethel. So we can go back. You can see where Jerusalem is on that map. So Shechem, if I had to guess, is probably in the middle of the Manasseh area. Probably right around where that first S is. Do you see do you see on the map? And if you look right above Jerusalem, there's Benjamin. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, there's some. Moving on from Joshua, we get to the cycle of the judges. I love this. It's basically just one story repeating itself over and over and over. Repeating that, there's a reason enforcing the notion that if you don't learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. And nothing, I think, proves that more than the book of Judges. Normally, it falls something like this. The leader, the righteous leader dies, and people are going to fall into this path of sin and idolatry, or they're going to turn to the ways of the nations, or they're going to give up on God altogether. Whatever the cause is, it's going to force them away, and they're going to give themselves over to these things, and God is going to become very, very angry with them. Because God is very angry with them, and he allows them to lose their hedge of protection, and they become oppressed by their enemies. And then finally, the people, after learning that, there's a reason we follow this God being in the first place, decide to cry out and repent. God enacts a judge to save them. There's peace, and then judge dies, and the cycle repeats itself. So, what do we have on the book of Judges? Well, not really a lot, other than to say that we can look at some of these gods here that are worshipped and know that these were actual idols that people worshipped. They weren't things that the writers just made up. There's archaeological evidence to support that these things were worshipped. Baal or Balaam seems to be the most prevalent of all of them, who's mentioned quite a bit in the book of Judges, and I think is mentioned even in the New Testament, right? He's mentioned in Revelation, which is a local god, not like a big player you might expect for Ra or Zeus, but seems to be specific to the region of Canaan with the power of fertility. Fertility is a very common thing you see in mythology, because obviously what's one of the best things that you can do is make sure you have a new generation of people. And so Baal tends to be the chief god of the Canaanites, and we see Biden, is that right? That can't be it. I think that's Gideon. I think that's meant to be Gideon. I don't know where I got Biden off of that. Gideon destroys his father's altar to Baal in Judges chapter 6, verse 25. Asheroth, also called Asherith or Ashtar, is supposed to be the cohort of Baal. So Baal is the male chief deity. She is the female chief deity of the Canaanites and the Phoenicians. Maybe some early proto-religion of the Phoenicians coming over here mixed with the Canaanite religion, and that's kind of where she came with. There might have only been Baal. Not a whole lot of mention of her, so she is, I guess, less important. Maybe people cared a little bit more about what the male had to offer than the female. I don't know. But we see that in Judges chapter 3, and in Judges chapter 10, she gets at least 2 mentions of Israel served Baal and Asherah. So they go together. I'm actually surprised that she's not she is also a goddess of fertility, love, and of course the war, because, why don't we make love, not war? Why don't we make love and war? You could do both. You could populate your own war. It will be great. Often pictured like a lot of female images. You can see that she's naked. That's not all surprising. That's very common in ancient art styles. There are a lot of other gods not named that are given like one-offs. Moloch, I believe Moloch is where people were kind of sacrificing their kids to. They were also doing it in a little bit in a Baal worship, but often today Moloch, it's the thing that gets compared to Moloch today. Does anybody know? Abortion? Yes, a lot of people say that people who are committing abortion are just doing the same practices of sacrificing your kids to Moloch. Moab worshipped a god called Chemosh. Now, I actually knew a little bit about this one, but I never realized this person was actually a real thing, a real idol that actual people worshipped. I can only recall ever reading this name once somewhere else, and I'd be really impressed if you guys knew the answer to that. But there's actually in the Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis uses it as the god that the other humans in Narnia worship, not the one true God. And so He makes an appearance at the end of the book, but so apparently he is actually a god mentioned in the Bible. We see at least mentioned here in Judges. Is it Judges? Yeah, okay, so he doesn't really get a name here, but he says the gods of Moab. But he does get a name later in 1 Kings chapter 11, 17, and some others that we are probably guessing at that are only named by named. Dagon is another one. This is the god of the Philistines, or the god of grain infertility. You're starting to notice a theme. A lot of these gods are related to having survival. And both those things are very important. There was, what was it? It was the ark that was brought into the temple of Dagon, and when they went to, after it was captured, and when they went to go see it in the morning, the statue had fallen over like it was bowing to the ark. So we see that that happens in the time of David, but we see this is the first time Dagon shows up. It's kind of like this body of a fish, as you can see here, head of a man, body of a man, a lower body of the fish. This is the depiction. Yeah, so there's the Ark of the Covenant, and there's Dagon, broken, his arms cut off. So these are definitely things that people worshipped, and we've found plenty of archaeological evidence that these things were worshipped in the past. Another thing that we're going to see mentioned quite a bit, especially starting in the book of Judges, that's going to go well into the book of Kings, is the mention of high places. Now, this is one of the things that I was always really, really curious about, because I wanted to know, because every time I thought of a high place, I thought of that. You guys ever seen the Disney movie Hercules? No? You never seen that? Oh, okay. So there's a montage in the movie where Hercules finds out that he wants to find out who he is. So he's going to go to the temple of Zeus, and he's going to petition Zeus for answers into finding out his lineage. And it shows him like walking across the land, and he's singing this song. It's a Disney movie. And he makes it to the top of this hill, and there's like this shrine on top of this hill. That's what I always thought a high place was. But I was very, very surprised to see when I actually went to Arad. I did not take this picture. I could have shown the one that I took, but this is what I saw. This was a high place. Do you know what by definition makes this a high place? Those 2 steps. And you can see that there's the altars or the stones, and then you have the altars to the high place. These are actually replicas. The actual altars and stones are in the Israel Antiquity Museum, but you can go to Arad and you can see the replicas, and mostly would just like the real thing, except you can't ruin it. So this is what it is often talking about when it's talking about a high place, was a place that is higher off than the rest, that is specifically set apart for worship. Now this is really going to change in 1 Kings because of why. Something's going to happen in 1 Kings, and they're no longer going to do this anymore. Yes. Any guess? It's okay to be wrong, or if you just say you don't want to guess. Well, I mean, even you're not supposed to worship Elohim or Yahweh in these places. Because where do you worship Elohim? You worship him in the temple. And where's the temple? Jerusalem. So when you start to see these places really disappear, is the building of Solomon's temple. So what they did was they centralized worship. So not even, one, you would have to go to Jerusalem to worship God. But 2 is that you wouldn't even associate your God with these places. Because what were these places former? They were former idols to false gods. So by taking away the high places, you are also taking away the association with false god worship, even if you are still worshiping God.
And I guess that's true, right? Because
Yeah.
we see all the time that the kings went in, and you would say they did this good, this good, this good, but they
Mm-hmm.
didn't take down
The high places. Yeah. Now, do we need to go to the temple to worship Jesus? No. Do we need to go to church to worship Jesus? No, but it's highly recommended because, huh? Yes, because we understand that the church is not a building or a place, but it is a group of people. And so, to have true, proper worship, you should be with the body. There's also a mention of Hazor standing pillars or standing stones. We've found some of these. This is a picture taken of them in the Israel Antiquities Museum. You could see like there's a little statue over there on the far left, probably of Hazor himself. I honestly don't remember what these stones represent. I'm sure that you could probably go and look them up. To me, they kind of remind me of Stonehenge. I mean, just because of, it's just a giant stone pillar going straight up. And we don't know what they would have looked like exactly thousands of years ago. Maybe they placed cross beams across them. Maybe they decorated them with flowers or whatnot. I don't know. We can only base a lot of this off of what little information we have in the text and what some cultures are still doing today. So that pretty much covers us all the way to the end of the time of Judges. We're going to talk about the first actual king, the first one who gets at least mentioned, gets the status of being the first king, and that is King Saul. So we have a little bit. At this time, though Saul is made king of Israel, we're still looking at Israel as largely a chieftain society. And that's not really all that surprising, because what's one of the very first things David and Solomon do? They establish a palace. They establish a centralized place of worship. They establish a form of government. Does Saul have that? Well, we assume he does, but we probably don't see it as a more evolved system till much more closer to David and Solomon's time. But we do have we have this Keef Yafa, which Tracon, which mentions the establishment of chief and officers have established a king. It dates back to the time period of Saul, so it's quite possible that they're talking about Saul. It was found in an area that is said to be associated with Saul's reign. So it certainly seems like this could be Saul. You can see it was found here. I wonder if this is the city where they hung Saul's body on the wall. I'll have to go and look that up. Because I went to that city, and this reminds me of that. It's kind of like an amusement park now. You take a trolley there, everything's like roped off, and it's very highly regulated, as opposed to just some of the places you can pull up off the side of the road and get out of your car and drink water out of their cistern, but I wouldn't recommend. So it's certainly possible. But that's really all we have on it. And that's not really all that surprising, because Saul's reign is rather short. His line is almost immediately cut off, at least in terms of lineage. We know that he and his sons were killed. We know that he does have a relative that survives, that gets brought into David's household, but it just seems to die off after that. But it does seem that this line is completely rejected, where we have this little exchange about Saul sinning, and Samuel says to Saul, "I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of God, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel." Do you remember what his sin was? This is one of my favorite things in the Bible. Do you remember what Saul's sin was? Why he's finally being rejected?
Well, he told him 2 times, right? It's the second.
There was something he did in particular that drove this particular moment.
Well, it's not the one he went to see the fortune teller person.
No, that's afterwards, because Samuel's already dead at this point. This is where he gives an offering. Yeah, this is where he gives an offering that he's not supposed to give. Samuel is supposed to give the offering, and he's delayed.
Delayed in coming, so he
Yes.
and gave it to them.
Yeah.
And then before they could finish, Samuel showed up.
Mm-hmm. And so he's mad that he wasn't supposed to do the offering, because who's supposed to do the offerings? The priests are supposed to do the offerings. Who's the priest?
Well, I guess
Who are normally the priests? Let me ask that question. It's not that hard. Who are normally the priest? The Levites. Okay, great. Now Saul is a what? Do you remember? It's fine if you don't. Do you remember, Ed? He's from the smallest tribe. Benjamin. There you go. And so by law, he wasn't allowed to. However, if you turn all the way to 1 Samuel chapter 1, you're going to read about the birth of Samuel with Hannah and her husband. And it very quite clearly states that they are Ephraimites. So the question is, this is my favorite thing in the Bible that I would have never figured out on my own, is that if it's okay for Samuel to do it, why is it not okay for Saul to do it? Ooh, Ed, go ahead. No? So, and I'll give you a really big hint. You want a really big hint? What's not on this map? Levi is not on this map. So, he has dual citizenship. He is both a Levite and an Ephraimite. So, and we know that actually because if you go to the genealogies and Chronicles, it will tell you he's a Levite. So, yes, Ed.
On your other slide, what did it say his response was?
Uh,
The Lord will not do this.
yeah.
Who told him?
Oh, well, I meant, what was his sin specifically? What was it? That was my question. I will not return for you, for rejected the word of the Lord of the God, and the Lord has rejected you from being king of Israel. So he did what he wasn't supposed to do, and it was kind of like the last straw kind of thing. I have to imagine. But yeah, he offered the sacrifice. It wasn't his place to do it. He did it anyway because he was being impatient, and this is the consequence of that. So, all right, that's really all we got on Saul. We're going to get a little bit more on David, but still, we're not going to get a whole lot. The one thing I found this one a while ago, which I kind of pointed out to you, is a while ago, and I don't know how long ago, there was a shard found that said Goliath of Gath. Dates to about 950 BC. Why is this important? Well, just prove that there's a archaeological claim that there was at least a man. It doesn't say anything about his height. That there was named Goliath, and he probably was of Gath. The question mark there is because it's not all the way Gath. I thought I had it here. It's the last part is kind of cut off, so you fill in the blanks. And so, but most people, I mean, there's always people who will disagree about everything, but most people are thinking that this is pretty much what it translates to.
Something that came from like
A pottery shard. This is what this is. It's a pottery shard. Why it's on here, I mean, we don't really know. We know that they wrote extensively on pottery. There's plenty of evidence of that, and this is rather crude as far as writing goes. So I mean, it dates to the time period, so it fits what we thought was a mythological figure. And that's kind of like how people look at the David and Goliath story. They look at it as a mythological story told about a person who has a larger-than-life personality already. And I've talked about this before. I talked about this with George Washington. There are a ton of stories that we learn about George Washington that kind of portray this a larger-than-life status. But he's already a larger-than-life character. But I'm willing to bet a lot of those stories aren't true. But this at least would probably support the claim that that one is true. So the biggest thing is when you start to really get down into it, one of the criticisms that are going to happen is we're not really seeing a lot of archaeological evidence to support a line before, I think it's Omri in the north, and Hezekiah in the south. And so a lot of people are on the fence about whether or not these people were actually king. Now, this is what the Bible has to say about this. It says, "And David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judea? And the Lord said, go up. And David says, to which I shall go up? And he said, to Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, to Ahinoam and Jerel, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David brought up his men who were with him, everyone with his household, and they lived in the tombs of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the household of Judah." So like I said, the scholars tended to really question, well, you have this very larger-than-life character. Shouldn't we see some evidence that he actually existed? And this is probably kind of gets overshadowed a lot by his son. Well, yeah, he's obviously more important than his son as far as the Bible is concerned. But his son is the one that did all of those building projects that David specifically was not allowed to do. Why? Remember why David wasn't allowed to build the temple? Yeah, he was a man of war. He had blood on his hands. So we see no big inscriptions. So a lot of people think that he was at best a local chieftain, or the Bible is exaggerating its claims. However, we do have one powerful inscription, and that is what is called the Dan inscription. This is the Dan tablet, and you can kind of see, for those, if you can, see how it's kind of like white right there? So that's where it's outlining the important bit. I thought I had it. Oh, yeah, here it is. It's all right here. We'll talk about it. This is what we have, the actual translation, realizing that a lot of this is cut off. But this is what it says. "And cut, my father went up against him when he fought and my father laid down. He went to his ancestors, became sick and died, and the king of Israel entered previously in my father's land, and Hadden made him king, and Hadden went in front of me, and I departed from the seven of my kingdom, and I slew 70 kings, who harness thousands of probably chariots, and thousands of horsemen or horses. I killed Jerome, son of Ahab, the king of Israel, and I killed Azuahu, son of Jerome, king of the house of David. And I set their towns in ruins and turned their land into desolation, and over Israel I laid siege upon." Okay, so this is obviously afterwards, but he specifically references that even if there's no archaeological claims to support that David was a king, that this king at this time who wrote this inscription believed that there was a house of David. Now, since he's not from that area, that probably tells us that it was a very common knowledge, and it was definitely a true statement. So this is the biggest proof that we have that David existed as a king. Not a lot, but, you work with what you got. biblical collaboration. We do guess at what we think his kingdom was. In fact, there is an area of Jerusalem that is what is called the David's kingdom. These are pictures I took. You can kind of see, I mean, it looks like a big pile of rubble. The older it gets, the worse it looks. In fact, I took a picture of that and I said, is that what I think it is? And my teacher's like, probably. And what do you think that is? No, this stone with a hole in it. Yeah, it's probably a toilet. So I took these pictures. It's there in the old city of David. What I find really, really interesting is you start to go through the city of David. Eventually, you're going to come upon this area, and you're going to see this giant hole in the ground. And you can. I took this photo so you can see it. This is how deep it goes. It's probably about 20 feet-ish. I don't know. I was just guessing. But this is what's called Warren Shaft, named after the archaeologist, that's the word I'm looking for, who discovered it. Some of you two are looking at me with blank faces, so I'm going to guess you have no clue what this is. But this is also proof that this might be of David's kingdom, because it's found in the old city of David, and it's referenced a few times in the Bible. So first time we see in 1 Chronicles 11:4-6, David and the Israelites went to Jerusalem, that is Jebus, where the Jebusites were, and the inhabitants of the land, and the inhabitants of Jebus said to David, "You will not come in here." Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. David says, "Whoever strikes the Jebusites first shall be chief and commander." And Joab, the son of Jehoram, went up first, so he became chief. It's kind of a very strange thing to say, went up first, so people think that he went up. Because when you read about Jerusalem, one of the things that you do is you always read that you go up to Jerusalem. And that's not specifically because of the shaft, but because Jerusalem is on a mountain. Mount Moriah, to be exact. But it does get a little bit more explained in some of these other scriptures, where you see David took the stronghold, the city of that is the city of David, and David said, "Whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind." Okay, well, now this makes a little bit more sense, right? Because what's at the bottom of this shaft? You see that little bit of green there? What is that? It's water. And then, of course, you have... Oh, no, I just have those two. I thought there was 3 verses, but I guess just those 2. Now, one of the neat things about the Warren Shaft is once you travel a little bit, not too far from Warren Shaft, probably like 100 feet, you're going to come through another area of Jerusalem that has very famous prominence, and that is Hezekiah's tunnel. Which also leads into the old city. Water was brought in from the outside to the inside through Hezekiah's tunnel, so it makes sense that Warren Shaft connects to that same water source. So we have found these things. Definitely proof to this story. Really, there's only 2 outcomes to this. Is that these things were well known at the time, and then they become some kind of mythological status, which I suppose is possible, or that they were actually as described. Now, I find that the first one doesn't make nearly as much sense as the second one, because if your prominence is to give David credit, why not just have David be the one that goes up the shaft? He's the king, he's the conqueror. In fact, he's going to go on and king and conquer for quite a bit more after this. And so why not just have him do it? But he doesn't. He sends the commander of his army. So to me, it makes more sense, especially if you're going to give someone else the credit, that it probably is more accurate to the truth.
Interesting, though, they haven't uncovered a lot
Yeah. And that's probably because he was king for a long time. Hmm. Well, mostly David's battles were with local areas, and most of those local areas were probably smaller than him. Now, Solomon, I'm a little bit more surprised about because we know Solomon dealt with trade with Tyre and Lebanon and Egypt, that he had all these wives. And while we have some archaeological evidence, and one of the things I want to point out is this. These are locking gate systems that prove, it said Solomon built the chariot cities of Gazor, Megiddo, and Hazor. Well, we know that whoever built them the same way because all three gate systems are identical. And we'll talk about that next time. But other than that, there's really not a whole lot of information on Solomon. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's also the name of one of the false gods of the area, so I'm wondering why it kept that particular name. Maybe it was just a name that carried over from a different time period. If you look at the map, you can kind of see the rain. This is the other thing, is this is a big area to control. You got the red, that's the Saul area. It kind of expands into what is modern-day Israel now. And then grows even bigger to the north, almost stretching all the way to the Euphrates. That's Solomon's territory. And eventually this is going to shrink tremendously. But this is what the Bible claims that Solomon controlled in his time period. And we don't have a whole lot of archaeological evidence to support what's going on here. And that's what I've been saying for a very long time. It's good, like I said, the closer we get to our time period, the easier it's going to be to find stuff. And that's the big deciding factor, is that there could still be stuff there today, and we just haven't found it, or it's just been completely destroyed by time. And this area in particular, what is it? I mean, well, not just the West Bank, but it's largely a desert. I mean, it gets when you go north, it gets very green, which when you read about the cedars of Lebanon, it kind of makes sense because it gets very green. But like you go south, it's pretty much all desert, and very few things do well in very dry climates. One of the reasons that the Dead Sea Scrolls was such a great find was they somehow preserved them miraculously, or at least the ones where the jars were not broken. Anyway, that's all I got for today. We'll cover more of this in 2 weeks. Did you learn something today? Yeah. Good. Need to invite more people.